Um, Paul, it is your floor whenever you are ready.
Okay, thank you. Visual check, the slides are showing for everyone and the sound levels are working.
Both are good.
All right, thank you, Josh. It's always nice to hear Pamela. I always learn something, and so that's always great. This is from the blurb, and so this is from the blurb on the Focus on Forage page, and essentially, we have relatively low participation rate, and the questions are addressed or listed on the page. Why is forage insurance being utilized at such low rates in Wisconsin? That's part of what we'll talk about today. That documenting that and thinking about it, and then what type of forage systems benefit by reduced production risk from purchasing these products. I'll try to kind of address those as best I can quickly here. So we've talked about these policies, and there's a lot of activity and such going on in the livestock and forage world lately. And just like, I think some of these other policies, I just want people to understand we're not talking about these livestock policies. They're for about, a lot of them are about market prices, either the gross price or for the LRP or the dairy revenue protection. And then the gross margin policies are price margins between the market price for the cow or the milk and the feed costs usually. We're going to be on these three: the forage production, the stand establishment, and the forage seeding, and then this rainfall insurance and these the PRF. You're essentially insuring rainfall in a sector at different times in the year, or you're insuring stand establishment, or you're insuring your total production. This is crop insurance participation by state and crop in 2023. And what this is just corn and soybeans. You can see, Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, our neighbors are all in the 90% plus for corn and soybeans. And these go back years. Michigan's a little bit lower, and there's Wisconsin in at about upper 70s for corn and soybeans. We're low relative to our neighbors. That number has been pretty constant over the years. After the dry year in 2018, there was a blip up in insurance coverage. I'm curious if we'll see a blip up here in 2024 with the dry year and relatively dry year in 2023. But for our 10-year average, it's right on those bars, 77, 79%. That's corn and beans. So where are we at in forage? This is sort of the official numbers, way down there. Places like Illinois and Iowa, in Minnesota, the percent of their forage acres covered is very small. Wisconsin, according to these data, it's about, upper 25% of our forage acres. It's like, wow, it's way different than that corn and soybean world. This is our forage and alfalfa acres here in the state way back to 1950, and what you can see is since basically about 1990, we've been on a pretty serious decline in both alfalfa and just hay in general, the non-alfalfa hay or mixtures. And that's part of, we're seeing this movement away from alfalfa. We have very low relative to corn and soybeans participation rates in forage insurances. And these are the acres insured. So you can see forage production had a big spike for some reason in 95, but in general, it's been following that trend we saw back before on a long, slow decline. But it seems to have leveled off at about a little under 200,000 acres. And then you can see the other two policies there, forage seeding and PRF. Forage seeding has been slowly, it's up a bit, and then but it's on an upward trend, but it's fairly flat in the last few years. And PRF is relatively new, but you can see the numbers. There are not a lot of acres under that. And so if you get very generous and say, we take all of those alfalfa acres and take those three policies and assume everybody's only insuring alfalfa, we're going to get up to about almost 40%. And so we seem to have a lot of room for growth. There seems to be 60% of the people in the state that have alfalfa just aren't insuring it, and for whatever reasons. So it seems like there's room to grow. That's partly why the RMA is interested. There's been some changes in these livestock policies. There's been some changes in these forage policies a little bit, trying to help farmers find value in these policies. What do we got to do to make them valuable to growers? So what I'm going to think now about is just look at it from the monetary perspective first, as sort of like I'm paying money in as an investment. What's the return on my investment? Think of it that way. And the way insurance companies and actuaries in general, the insurance people, think about this is something called a loss ratio. And what they do is take the ratio of indemnities to premiums. So 1.0 means on average that program is breaking even. You pay out money and you pay out in the premiums, dividing that ratio, and it's 1. That means on average over the long term, over many, many farmers and policies, Every dollar I bring in premiums, I'm paying out in indemnities. It's a break-even program. That's kind of that is essentially the goal for the RMA's mandated legislative goal from Congress, is to achieve a 1.0 program loss ratio, so that on average it's settling out. The premiums coming in are roughly equal to the indemnities going out for the program. There's a premium load that the companies get for administration and overhead of running the program, because they have to be able to cover the costs. They don't just, they have to have all those insurance and adjusters, insurance salespeople. They all have to make a living doing this stuff. So that there's an additional subsidy for them. But the key here to note, that's the program level. The indemnities divided by premiums has to be 1.0 roughly. But from the farmer's perspective, they aren't paying the full premium. The premiums are subsidized. The RMA and the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation, the governmental perspective is we want that to be a 1.0. But the farmer, they might care about it from a citizenship perspective, but in general, just thinking about their own little farm and their payments in and payments out, they aren't paying that full premium. They're paying roughly, and these are the numbers there, on corn, all the corn policies, and soybean policies, the farmers are paying about a third of the premium. The other 2/3 is the government premium subsidy that is paid. And so forage production, it's 38% is the rough share that the farmer pays. The other part is picked up as part of the forage, the premium subsidy. Forage seeding is 43% and PRF is 46%. These are the 10-year averages here in Wisconsin for these policies. The corn and soybean is average across all the policies, revenue protection and yield protection and everything, the area policies and such. But for corn and soybeans, it's primarily all revenue protection. So you kind of see, okay, that's why these policies are popular for the corn and soybeans. It's like I pay in, and I'm paying only a third of the rural cost. So program loss ratio is what the legislation is focusing on. Indemnities divided by all the premiums collected, the government part that they pay and the farmer part, that's got about 1.0. But the farmer's perspective is, I want to know the indemnities I received divided by the farmer's share of the premiums, or that's total premiums minus a subsidy. What's the farmer loss ratio look like? That's what they might be interested in. So this is looking at the last 10 years here. And these are the different years. This is that program one, the one that you're supposed to focus on getting 1.0. These are each year. This is all the farmers in the state who bought the policies. This is the average indemnities paid per dollar of premium collected. So we'll look at that very first top one, 1.32. That means that year, for every dollar of premium they collected from farmer, or this is for the program, from the farmers and the government's premium subsidy, they paid out on average $1.32. So the next year was only 15 cents. That was a great year for farmers. They all made money growing corn the old fashioned, and there's no big problems. They paid in $1 and got back 15 cents on average across all the farmers in the state and all the policies. In general, farmers prefer not making money on insurance because it means that's not a bad year. You're making money and you're well above, you're covered your cost of insurance. You still got plenty of revenue left over. You can see other few years in corn, where the only other year as bad as 2019, 105 for the program loss ratio. Soybeans has been relatively good in the state all these last 10 years. Then you see these forage policies over here, a little higher loss ratios. 2019 was bad, 278 for the forage production policy, 248 for the forage seeding policy. What that means is that winter before, there must have been a poor stand establishment, and these folks in the spring of 19 did not have good stand establishment. You can see a big one in 2018. You're kind of seeing sort of some of you that remember, oh yeah, that year was, that's the wet year we had. That spring was a lot of prevented plant. So hey, I can see why there was maybe a lot of forage problems that year. And then you can see PRF there on the far side. This is the visuals of it. If you want to see it visually, it's the same thing. The big black line is the 1.0, and you can kind of see corn and soybeans are down there. Well below that line also the time, but you see forage seeding and forage production at the program level, or there's quite a few years there above 1.0. This is the farmer's perspective. For every dollar I pay in, how much am I getting back on average across all the farms in the state and all the different kinds of policies? So corn in 2014 at 362 means on average for all the dollars worth of premiums paid by farmers in Wisconsin, they got back on average $3.62. And then you go down the other years there. You can see that 2019 was 318. So you can see those are bad loss years. And then you can see the other years there. But focusing in on the forage production and forage seeding and PRF, you can kind of see all of a sudden, like 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, lots of payments went out relative to the premiums collected, the farmers' premiums paid. You can even see the same year show up in the forage seeding. These are bad years where you spent $1 and got back $10. That means there's a lot of losses going on. And then PRF here, it's generally been below 1, except for these last few years where it's been breaking over the 1.9 roughly. So it's same data graphically, but what you can see here, this is that loss ratio. This is sort of an average return on investment from the farmer's perspective. So what these are now are those same loss ratios, all 10 years average, just to give you a sense of the long run average here in Wisconsin for these policies over the last 10 years. And so you see, so I'm looking at the orange ones, the farmer's loss ratio. And so what this means is on average, a farmer's paid in $1 for corn crop insurance, and they got back over these 10 years about $1.20. That's all the farmers in the state for the primarily revenue protection, but all the revenue, all the insurance policies. Soybeans a little lower, about 13 cents more than $1. But on average, the forage production policy, the forage seeding policy, both paid out quite a bit. You paid in $1, you got back on average $2.59. You paid in $1, on average, you got back $3.88 in the forage seeding policy over these last 10 years. PRF about $1. Pay $1 in, get 96 cents back. So these are those 10-year loss ratios by policy in Wisconsin. I guess I should add there. So what these mean is, on average, these policies are paying off. The corn and soybeans are high participation. They're still paying back, 13% or 20% return on investment on average across all the farms. But these forage policies are really paying off. Now, these got to remember, these are not guarantees. These are just averages across all the farms in all those years. And the other thing, these are just strict payouts. They're not looking at the risk management benefits. On average, I pay these in and get an average return, but those returns come when you need them, not when you don't need them. And so that's also a risk management benefit. They cover that floor. So the benefits to the farmers of these policies are even higher. So when I originally put this presentation together, before I started, I assumed these loss ratios for the the forage policies were going to be low or not very good. I was very surprised to see like, wow, 259 or 388 for these forage policies. So I'm like, why aren't farmers buying these? It's just like seems almost like a no-brainer. You pay in the money and there's a pretty good likelihood you're going to get some money back. Not every year and not all your places and everything, but it seems like in these last 10 years, these policies have been paying off for the forage production and forage seeding. PRF, I've got some opinions about, but it's been about a break even for the state. But those loss ratios have been rising, but we've also had some dry years. So that's what we call the loss ratio perspective, thinking about it from the farmer's perspective as a financial investment in a risky something or another, a risky insurance policy, if you want to think of it that way. Now I want to start thinking about some of the other ways farmers are using these policies, start thinking about it a little bit. So this is just a reminder of where we've been seeing total forage acres in the state. These are these 3 policies. What are farmers doing? The forage production, we started out almost 400,000 back in 2014. Over the last 10 years, dropped down, and it's been leveling off between 150 and 200,000, bouncing around. That's the number of acres insured with forage production. Forage seeding is fairly flat, and it's it's a little bit over 100, a little bit under 100, depends on the year. And then PRF's been extremely flat, right around 50, a little over 50,000. So we haven't seen a lot of growth in any of these in terms of acres insured. Now, this is the average acres per policy. So if I'm buying a forage production policy, what's the average number of acres per policy across the whole state in that year? And what you can kind of see here with the forage production and the PRF, they're both on an upward trend. So if the acres are flat, like PRF was, the acres insured, or we're declining like the forage production, and the average acres per policy is going up, that means the bigger farms are staying in and the smaller farms are dropping out, or basically larger operations are buying these policies than were back in 2014. In the last 10 years, we've seen larger farms are the ones buying these, not the small farms. The forage seeding is fairly flat. Maybe there's an upward trend, but you can, if there is an upward trend in that one, it's not substantial. But so maybe that one's not quite that generalization, but those first two, the PRF and the forage production, it's very clear as over the last 10 years, we've seen the farms that are using them are insuring more acres on each farm. And so the larger operations are buying these policies more than the smaller operations. So we're losing, small farmers are dropping out of these program participation in Wisconsin over the last 10 years. This is the average number of units per policy. Now, for most of these policies, you have to legally define which units are going to be used together. So like think of it as a group of fields that you're ensuring the production or the stand establishment or the PRF, the rainfall for a piece of a certain legally defined piece of property. That's a unit, but you can have more than one unit. It has to do it, or is it owned or is it rented? Is it across the county or a township line? Or is it a share lease? Is it a cash lease? Things like that. There's all these different things. You can separate things out into multiple units. And the way to think of it is, say you have a household and you've got like 3 or 4 cars. Let's say you have 4 cars. Do you want one deductible for the whole, all your cars, or you want individual deductibles for each car? If you can lump them all together. Maybe you have all 4 cars, you have a $5,000 deductible. You pay the first $5,000 of losses. Anything above that for repairs and maintenance, or insurable crashes, you pay everything above $5,000. Or do you want $1,250 for each car? That would be 4 different units. If you lump them all together, that's 1 unit with 1 big deductible. That's a single unit. If you break them out into a $1,250 deductible for each car, that's 4 units. That's what farmers can do with crop insurance. And in the last few years, farmers have really not thought about that much because there's been a huge move towards enterprise units on corn and soybeans. They provided larger premium discounts. So a lot of farms are lumping all their units together and having one large unit, an enterprise unit for all their corn, all their soybeans, and each in a separate unit. So they've been moving closer and closer towards 1 unit on average per farm or per policy. And what you see here is these forage policies have been moving to more units per policy. And before we had these large enterprise unit discounts for farmers, corn and soybean farmers, that was a recommendation. Break your farm up into as many units as possible because you're better off, you're more likely to get payments, you're more likely to get effective risk management when you separate out and have individual deductibles, as many as possible, on your different vehicles, if you want to think of it that way from a car perspective. And that's exactly what these crop farmers or what the forage farmers have been doing, breaking their farms up into these individual, separating them out and getting as many units as possible. Strong trend with the production insurance. PRF has multiple units. Forage seeding is it's 1 1/4 roughly. So what that means is, say there's 4 farmers insuring forage seeding. 1 has 2 units and the other 3 have 1 unit. And that would be an average of 1.25 units per policy. So forage seeding has been pretty flat, but the production insurance and PRF, farmers are doing what's recommended in most cases, which is to break your farm up into as many units as possible because you're going to get more effective coverage that way. So average number of units for these policies has been increasing. Upward trajectory, yeah, I've said that already. Okay. So the last part I want to cover on what they're doing with them is what we call the, what coverage levels are they choosing? Now, I haven't separated out forage production into the yield protection and the area yield protection, the farm level yield, or are you doing the county yield policy? But what you can see here is what's most popular in the forage production is that 60, 65, or 70% coverage level. 70% is the most popular, 60% of the policies, this would be 60% of the acres, I'm sorry. So all these numbers add up to 100% in each column. That means of all the acres insured with forage production in 2023, 60% were 60, 65, or 70% coverage. That's the most popular one. But those are the 3 most popular. The other one is a 50% cap policy. That's an individual coverage in your what I see, and we saw this back with crop insurance when it was before the enterprise units. There are a few people that see these insurance policies as a cost center. I got to minimize my costs, so I'll buy a catastrophic policy, minimum coverage level possible. Most likely a lender is encouraging them to have something. And then those who see it as potentially a profit center, a way to protect themselves from risk and maybe make some money off the insurance, they're using the buy-up coverage, 60, 65, or 70 for the forage production. Forage seeding, the coverage levels that are chosen are a little bit higher, 70, 75, 80%. 73% of those policies are in those 3 coverage levels of the acres insured. And that is basically what we saw for corn and soybeans, even now with revenue protection of corn and soybeans. Those are the three coverage levels that are most popular. It's about that same level. That is what we recommend. That's what we call the sweet spot. That's where, because you buy these higher coverage levels, it gets fairly expensive. And do you really need that much coverage? Can you, if only if you're very risk sensitive. And if they're below that, it doesn't pay off enough to make it worth. You're better off if your goal is to see it as a profit protection center. You're buying that 70, 75, 80%. That's very common. And then PRF, there's that, and I think of it as an area-wide policy, really. And it's that higher levels of coverage, 85, 90, when they're available. That's what people get, and that's exactly what they're buying. So what I would basically say is Wisconsin farmers have these three policies available, and you could be generous to say about 40% are covered with these policies. On average, these forage production, forage seeding policies are paying Wisconsin's farmers more indemnities on average than they're paying in premiums. They seem like a good deal. So I'm not sure, why aren't they more popular? They seem to be working. They're covering a lot of risks for farmers and they seem to be paying out on average. If we had done a general crop insurance for corn and soybean farmers, like say 10 years ago, before that, breaking it up into as many units as possible, choosing that 70, 75, maybe 80% coverage. Those are what we call the sweet spots. That's what I would have recommended. And that's exactly in general what these forage farmers are doing. What I would say, they're probably using it what I would call the recommended ways, unless you've got something different about your operation or about you as an operator. Those tend to be what most farmers do, and that's exactly what they're doing. So who would I recommend to look at forage insurance then? To me, these are the farmers that really focus on forage as their major source of revenue, not maybe the only, but a major source of revenue. And so who needs this coverage? It makes it difficult to survive a bad forage year, a year with bad establishment. You have to do some reestablishment costs, or you've got to worry about not making enough production. You've got some contracts you got to meet, or you just are expecting that revenue. And you're going to have trouble making loan payments if you don't, and you have to go out and buy extra forage, hay, those are the people who would find this insurance valuable. But if you're such a smaller farmer, maybe more of a weekend hobby farmer, or you have plenty of acres, you don't have a huge demand, you just sell the extra if you have it. If you don't have it, you're fine. You got your few cattle you have that you need it, you're okay. It's not important enough to you. Then yeah, maybe you don't find, that's why you don't find it valuable, even though your neighbors who do it are making money on it. To you, it's not that big a deal. It's only a 5, 10, 15% of my income in good years, and I'm not that worried about it. Maybe it's not worth your time then. The other one is if it's too small of an income source to bother. Maybe you've got a lot of forage acres, but you're a dairy farmer and you got plenty of forage every year. You're not that worried about it. Your real goal is I'm making money as a dairy farmer, not as a forage producer. And if you have to buy a little extra hay, you're not that worried about it. You're usually able to get some. It's not a major risk to you. It doesn't endanger the profit margin for your dairy farm. Maybe then you're not finding it valuable. But if it's a major source of income, that's who I would be thinking about. And I'm guessing that those farmers that see this as value are the ones buying it. That's kind of my attitude there, that I think the ones who find it valuable are there, and the other people, for whatever reason, are not seeking it out. So I'll pause here. Why don't more farmers use forage insurance? It might be the dairy effect, is what I'm thinking of it as. You look at these corn and soybeans in Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, all in the 95% range. Wisconsin is down there in that 78, 79%. Well, about 25% of our corn each year is cut and made into silage, sort of an indication of the relative size of the feed demand, for forage feed demand from using corn, not the grain, but the silage. Well, if you added 20% to these numbers in Wisconsin for the corn and soybeans, you'd be right up there the rest of the state. So part of me thinks dairy farmers aren't the big demanders for this forage insurance. They think of themselves as dairy farmers and not as forage producers, and they don't find this insurance valuable. So that's my guess, but I don't know. The way these policies paying out, it seems like it might be a chance to insure some risk and make some extra cash if you need it. So I'm done there. Got some thoughts on PRF, but I will bring them up at the end. So questions or comments?
Anything?